Question 1. The review process indicates that an employee received a phone call from an individual claiming to be a policyholder seeking to update their contact information. The caller provided the policyholder's name and policy number, but was unable to provide additional verifiable details when prompted. Which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to regulatory compliance and best professional practice in this situation? Option A. Provide the requested information to the caller, assuming that the name and policy number are sufficient proof of identity. Option B. Ask the caller for their social insurance number to confirm their identity, as this is a common verification method. Option C. Politely inform the caller that further verification is required according to ICE security protocols and offer to guide them through the secure identity verification process. Option D. Decline to provide any information or assistance, stating that ICE has a strict policy against disclosing any details over the phone. Correct answer is C. Politely inform the caller that further verification is required according to ICE security protocols and offer to guide them through the secure identity verification process. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient information gathering with the strict regulatory requirements for data handling and client confidentiality. The pressure to quickly resolve a client's query must be weighed against the potential for unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information, which could lead to regulatory breaches and reputational damage. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes adherence to ICE-established data protection policies and regulatory obligations. By verifying the caller's identity through a secure, multi-factor authentication process before disclosing any personal information, the employee upholds the principles of data privacy and security mandated by ICE operational framework. This aligns with the regulatory expectation that all customer interactions involving personal data must be conducted with the utmost care to prevent unauthorized access or disclosure. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves disclosing information based solely on the caller providing a name and policy number. This fails to meet the required standard of identity verification, creating a significant risk of unauthorized access to sensitive client data. This directly contravenes ICE data protection guidelines and potentially breaches privacy regulations by allowing information to be shared with an unverified individual. Another incorrect approach is to refuse to provide any information whatsoever, even after a reasonable attempt at verification, citing a blanket policy. While caution is necessary, an overly rigid stance can hinder legitimate customer service and fail to meet the implied obligation to assist clients within regulatory bounds. This approach lacks the nuanced judgment required to balance security with service delivery and may not align with ICE service standards. A further incorrect approach is to ask for information that is not part of the standard verification protocol, such as asking for the caller's date of birth or social insurance number. This not only deviates from established procedures, but also risks collecting unnecessary personal information, potentially creating new data security risks and violating privacy principles by requesting data beyond what is required for verification. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must employ a decision-making process that begins with understanding the specific regulatory requirements and internal policies governing data access and client interaction. When faced with a situation requiring judgment, they should first identify the core objective, e.g., assisting a client, and then assess the potential risks, e.g., data breach, regulatory noncompliance. The next step is to consult established protocols and procedures for identity verification. If the situation presents ambiguity or a conflict between service and security, escalating the query to a supervisor or a designated compliance officer is the most prudent course of action. This ensures that decisions are made with the full benefit of expertise and in strict accordance with regulatory and ethical standards. Question 2. The analysis reveals that a financial advisor employed by an ICE-regulated entity has a close personal friendship with a long-term client. This client has recently approached the advisor about a potential joint business venture that would require significant personal investment from the client. The advisor believes this venture could be beneficial for the client, but also recognizes the potential for a conflict of interest due to their personal relationship and the prospect of future business dealings related to the venture. The advisor must decide how to proceed with advising the client on this matter. Option A. Focus on the potential benefits of the business venture for the client, emphasizing the advisor's belief in its success, and downplay any potential risks or conflicts of interest to encourage the client's investment. Option B. Immediately terminate all professional engagement with the client to avoid any appearance of impropriety, without providing any further advice or guidance on the business venture. Option C. Fully disclose the personal relationship and the potential conflict of interest to the client. Explain how it might influence their advice, and obtain the client's informed consent to continue providing advice, ensuring all recommendations are based solely on the client's best interests and suitability. Option D. Advise the client on the business venture without mentioning the personal friendship, assuming the professional relationship is distinct from the personal one, and that objective advice can still be provided. The correct answer is C. Fully disclose the personal relationship and the potential conflict of interest to the client. Explain how it might influence their advice, and obtain the client's informed consent to continue providing advice, ensuring all recommendations are based solely on the client's best interests and suitability. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario where a financial advisor, operating within the ICBC hiring assessment test's regulatory framework, must navigate a situation involving potential conflicts of interest and client confidentiality. This is professionally challenging because the advisor has a personal relationship with a client, who is also a potential business partner, creating a dual role that can blur ethical lines and compromise objective advice. The need for careful judgment stems from the imperative to uphold client trust, adhere to regulatory standards regarding disclosure and suitability, and maintain professional integrity. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes transparency and client well-being above personal gain or convenience. Specifically, it involves a clear and upfront disclosure of the personal relationship to the client, seeking informed consent regarding the potential conflict, and ensuring that any advice provided remains solely in the client's best interest, independent of the personal relationship or potential business venture. This aligns with regulatory requirements for disclosure of conflicts of interest and the ethical duty to act in the client's best interest, as mandated by the principles governing financial advisory conduct within the ICBC purview. An incorrect approach that involves proceeding with advice without disclosing the personal relationship is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This breaches the duty of transparency and can mislead the client into believing the advice is purely objective, when it may be influenced by the advisor's personal interests. This violates principles of good faith and fair dealing. Another incorrect approach, which is to cease all professional engagement with the client immediately without proper transition or explanation, could be seen as abandoning the client's needs and potentially violating contractual or professional obligations to provide adequate service, especially if the client relies on the advisor for ongoing management. A third incorrect approach, which is to prioritize the potential business opportunity over the client's existing financial needs and suitability, represents a clear breach of fiduciary duty and regulatory mandates to place the client's interests first. This demonstrates a lack of professional integrity and a failure to adhere to suitability requirements. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential conflicts of interest. This involves a thorough self-assessment of any personal relationships or external interests that could influence professional judgment. Following identification, the framework dictates immediate and full disclosure to the client, allowing them to make an informed decision about how to proceed. If the conflict cannot be adequately managed through disclosure and consent, the professional must consider whether to recuse themselves from providing advice or to seek guidance from a supervisor or compliance department. The overarching principle is to always prioritize the client's best interests and adhere strictly to all applicable regulations and ethical codes. Question 3. Operational review demonstrates the introduction of a new automated customer onboarding system. What is the most appropriate initial step in assessing the potential risks associated with this new system? Option A. Prioritize the assessment of potential cost savings and efficiency gains, and only consider risks that directly threaten these benefits. Option B. Proceed with the implementation of the new system, assuming that the benefits of automation will outweigh any potential unforeseen issues. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential operational, financial, and reputational risks, and develops appropriate mitigation strategies. Option D. Focus the risk assessment solely on the technical aspects of the system's functionality, as this is the primary area of change. The correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment that identifies, analyzes, and evaluates potential operational, financial, and reputational risks, and develops appropriate mitigation strategies. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the assessment of a new operational process against established risk management principles without the benefit of historical data or direct experience. The pressure to implement a new system quickly, coupled with the inherent uncertainties of a novel approach, necessitates a robust and well-reasoned risk assessment to prevent potential negative outcomes for the organization and its stakeholders. The challenge lies in balancing innovation with prudence. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic and comprehensive identification of potential risks associated with the new operational process. This includes considering various categories of risk such as operational, financial, reputational, and compliance risks. For each identified risk, a thorough assessment of its likelihood and potential impact should be conducted. Subsequently, appropriate mitigation strategies must be developed and implemented. This approach aligns with best professional practice by proactively addressing potential issues before they materialize, thereby safeguarding the organization's assets, reputation, and operational integrity. It is ethically sound as it demonstrates due diligence and a commitment to responsible business conduct. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to proceed with the implementation without any formal risk assessment, assuming that the new process is inherently superior and will not introduce new risks. This demonstrates a failure in due diligence and a disregard for established risk management principles, potentially leading to unforeseen operational failures, financial losses, or reputational damage. It violates the ethical obligation to act in the best interest of the organization and its stakeholders. Another incorrect approach would be to conduct a superficial risk assessment that only considers obvious or easily quantifiable risks, while ignoring less apparent or qualitative risks. This approach is flawed because it fails to capture the full spectrum of potential threats, leaving the organization vulnerable to unexpected events. It represents a failure to exercise professional judgment and a lack of commitment to a comprehensive risk management framework. A third incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the potential benefits of the new process and downplay or dismiss any identified risks. This biased perspective can lead to inadequate mitigation strategies or a false sense of security, increasing the likelihood of adverse outcomes. It is ethically questionable, as it prioritizes short-term gains over long-term stability and responsible risk management. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach risk assessment by adopting a structured and objective methodology. This involves clearly defining the scope of the assessment, engaging relevant stakeholders, utilizing appropriate risk identification techniques, and employing a consistent framework for evaluating likelihood and impact. The decision-making process should prioritize the protection of the organization and its stakeholders by ensuring that identified risks are adequately understood and managed. This requires a commitment to continuous improvement and a willingness to adapt strategies as new information becomes available. Question 4. Compliance review shows that ICBC is considering a new digital platform for claims processing. To ensure robust risk management, which of the following approaches to assessing the associated risks would be most appropriate and aligned with ICBC's operational and regulatory environment? Option A. Focus exclusively on the most technologically advanced or novel risks associated with the platform, assuming these are inherently the most critical. Option B. Rely primarily on the subjective opinions of the IT development team regarding potential risks without formalizing the assessment process. Option C. Prioritize risks based on a combination of their potential financial impact, likelihood of occurrence, and the regulatory implications for ICBC operations in British Columbia. Option D. Conduct an in-depth risk assessment for every minor technical glitch that could potentially occur on the new platform, regardless of its severity or frequency. The correct answer is C. Prioritize risks based on a combination of their potential financial impact, likelihood of occurrence, and the regulatory implications for ICBC operations in British Columbia. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the need for proactive risk identification with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the potential for overanalysis. The ICE Insurance Corporation of British Columbia operates within a highly regulated environment in British Columbia, Canada, where its primary mandate is to provide affordable auto insurance and promote road safety. Therefore, risk assessment must be aligned with these objectives and the specific regulatory framework governing insurance in BC. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it focuses on a systematic, data-driven, and proportionate response to identified risks. It acknowledges that not all risks are equal and prioritizes those with the highest potential impact and likelihood, aligning with ICE mandate to manage its insurance portfolio effectively and protect policyholders. This approach is grounded in principles of prudent risk management, which are implicitly or explicitly supported by insurance industry, best practices and regulatory expectations for financial institutions to maintain solvency and fair treatment of customers. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the most novel or complex risks, without considering their actual impact or likelihood, fails to allocate resources efficiently. This could lead to neglecting more prevalent or severe risks that pose a greater threat to ICE financial stability or policyholder interests. Ethically, this could be seen as a failure of fiduciary duty to manage the corporation's assets responsibly. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes risks based on anecdotal evidence or personal intuition, rather than objective data and established methodologies, is professionally unsound. This lacks the rigor expected in a regulated industry and can lead to biased decision-making, potentially overlooking significant systemic risks or unfairly focusing on minor issues. This deviates from the principles of objective assessment and evidence-based practice. A third incorrect approach that involves an exhaustive, all-encompassing risk assessment for every minor operational change, regardless of its potential impact, demonstrates a lack of proportionality and efficiency. While thoroughness is important, an overly burdensome process can stifle innovation and operational agility, consuming valuable resources that could be better deployed elsewhere. This can also lead to analysis paralysis, hindering timely decision-making. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the specific regulatory context and ICE mandate. 2. Identifying potential risks through various channels, e.g., internal reports, external trends, customer feedback. 3. Establishing clear criteria for risk assessment, including likelihood, impact, financial, reputational, operational, regulatory, and velocity. 4. Prioritizing risks based on these criteria using a structured framework. 5. Developing and implementing appropriate mitigation strategies proportionate to the identified risk level. 6. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment process and the identified risks. Question 5. During the evaluation of potential operational risks for a financial services firm, which approach to risk assessment would best align with regulatory expectations and professional best practices for ensuring robust risk management? Option A. Focusing exclusively on risks that have materialized in the past year, assuming that future risks will be similar and not exploring potential emerging threats. Option B. Systematic process that involves identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risks based on established methodologies, considering both historical data and forward-looking scenarios, and documenting mitigation strategies aligned with the firm's risk appetite. Option C. Conducting an exhaustive, highly detailed risk assessment that requires extensive data collection and analysis, even if it significantly delays the implementation of necessary controls. Option D. Relying primarily on the collective experience and informal discussions of senior management to identify and prioritize potential risks, without a formal documentation or validation process. The correct answer is B. A systematic process that involves identifying, analyzing, and evaluating risks based on established methodologies, considering both historical data and forward-looking scenarios, and documenting mitigation strategies aligned with the firm's risk appetite. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for comprehensive risk assessment with the practical constraints of time and resources. A thorough risk assessment is fundamental to sound financial management and regulatory compliance, ensuring that potential threats to the organization's stability and reputation are identified and mitigated. The difficulty lies in determining the appropriate level of detail and the most effective methods for identifying and evaluating these risks without becoming overwhelmed or missing critical vulnerabilities. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and documented process that aligns with the organization's risk appetite and strategic objectives. This involves not only identifying potential risks, but also assessing their likelihood and impact, and then developing appropriate responses. Such a structured methodology ensures that risk management is integrated into decision-making, fostering a proactive rather than reactive stance. This aligns with the principles of good governance and the overarching regulatory expectation for robust risk management frameworks, which are designed to protect stakeholders and maintain market integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on historical data without considering emerging trends or future uncertainties would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a lack of forward-looking analysis, which is a critical component of effective risk management. Regulations often mandate that firms consider not just past events, but also potential future disruptions, such as technological advancements, geopolitical shifts, or evolving market dynamics. Ignoring these can lead to a false sense of security and leave the organization exposed to unforeseen risks. Another incorrect approach, which involves relying on anecdotal evidence or the opinions of a few individuals without a structured framework for validation, is also professionally unsound. This method lacks objectivity and can be heavily influenced by personal biases, leading to an incomplete or inaccurate understanding of the risk landscape. Regulatory bodies expect risk assessments to be based on reliable data and systematic analysis, not subjective interpretations. This approach fails to meet the standard of due diligence and can result in misallocation of resources or inadequate mitigation strategies. A third incorrect approach, characterized by an overly complex and time-consuming assessment that paralyzes decision-making, is also problematic. While thoroughness is important, risk assessment should be proportionate to the nature and scale of the business. An assessment that is so intricate that it hinders timely action or becomes unmanageable undermines its purpose. Professionals must strike a balance between comprehensiveness and practicality, ensuring that the assessment process is efficient and leads to actionable insights. This approach can also be seen as a failure to adhere to the principle of proportionality in risk management. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the organization's risk appetite, its strategic goals, and the relevant regulatory requirements. Professionals should begin by defining the scope and objectives of the risk assessment, followed by selecting appropriate methodologies for risk identification and evaluation. This should include a mix of qualitative and quantitative techniques where applicable, and a consideration of both internal and external factors. Crucially, the process should be iterative, with regular reviews and updates to reflect changes in the risk environment. Documentation of the process, findings, and mitigation plans is essential for accountability and continuous improvement. Question 6. The efficiency study reveals that current risk assessment processes for new insurance products are time-consuming. Which of the following approaches best balances the need for efficiency with the ICBC regulatory obligations for sound risk management? Option A. Implement a standardized, one-size-fits-all risk assessment template for all new products, regardless of their complexity or market novelty, to ensure consistent and rapid processing. Option B. Reduce the number of risk factors considered in the assessment of new products to expedite the approval process, assuming that the most common risks are already well understood. Option C. Focus solely on reducing the operational costs associated with risk assessment by outsourcing a significant portion of the analysis to third-party vendors without a thorough due diligence process on their risk management capabilities. Option D. Streamline the data collection and analysis phases of risk assessment by integrating advanced analytical tools and automating routine checks, while ensuring that expert review remains a critical component for complex or novel risks. The correct answer is D. Streamline the data collection and analysis phases of risk assessment by integrating advanced analytical tools and automating routine checks, while ensuring that expert review remains a critical component for complex or novel risks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for operational efficiency with the imperative of robust risk management. The pressure to reduce costs and streamline processes can inadvertently lead to the overlooking or underestimation of potential risks, especially those that are less quantifiable or have a longer-term impact. The ICE mandate to ensure financial stability and protect policyholders means that any efficiency measures must not compromise the integrity of its risk assessment framework. Careful judgment is required to identify where efficiency gains can be made without introducing unacceptable levels of risk. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the existing risk assessment methodologies to identify areas where technology or process improvements can enhance accuracy and speed without sacrificing depth. This might include leveraging data analytics for more sophisticated risk profiling, automating certain data collection processes, or implementing advanced modeling techniques. This approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with the ICE regulatory obligations to maintain sound risk management systems. It demonstrates a proactive stance in adapting to evolving industry standards and technological advancements, ensuring that risk assessments remain effective and efficient. This aligns with the principles of prudent financial management and regulatory compliance, which are paramount for a public insurer. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach would be to implement efficiency measures solely based on cost reduction, without a thorough evaluation of their impact on the accuracy and comprehensiveness of risk assessments. This could lead to the adoption of superficial or incomplete risk identification processes, potentially exposing the ICE to unforeseen financial losses or operational disruption. This fails to meet the regulatory expectation of maintaining adequate risk management systems and could be seen as a dereliction of duty to protect policyholder interests. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize speed of assessment over the quality of data and analysis. This might involve relying on outdated or insufficient data sources, or cutting corners in the validation of risk factors. Such an approach would undermine the reliability of the risk assessments, making it difficult to accurately price premiums, set reserves, or manage capital effectively. This directly contravenes the principles of sound financial management and could lead to regulatory scrutiny and penalties. A third incorrect approach would be to assume that all risks can be adequately managed through existing, unchanged processes, and that efficiency gains can only come from reducing the human element in risk assessment. This overlooks the nuanced and often qualitative nature of certain risks, such as emerging market trends or reputational risks, which require expert judgment and human oversight. Over-reliance on automation without appropriate human intervention can lead to blind spots in risk identification and management, failing to uphold the ICE duty of care. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that prioritizes a risk-based approach to efficiency. This involves first understanding the critical risk assessment functions and their regulatory requirements. Then, identify potential efficiency gains through technology or process redesign, but always subject these to a rigorous impact assessment on risk identification, measurement, and mitigation. The decision-making process should involve cross-functional collaboration, including risk management, operations, and IT, to ensure a holistic view. Regular review and validation of new processes are essential to confirm that efficiency is achieved without compromising risk management effectiveness. Question 7. The performance metrics show a consistent upward trend in the number of customer complaints related to transaction processing errors over the last 2 quarters. While the overall volume of transactions has also increased, the rate of errors per 1,000 transactions has also seen a marginal but noticeable rise. Option A. Initiate a comprehensive review of the transaction processing system and associated workflows, including staff training and quality assurance procedures, to identify root causes and implement targeted corrective actions. Option B. Advise management that the increase in complaints is likely a natural consequence of increased business volume and requires no further action at this time. Option C. Focus solely on disciplinary actions for individuals whose transactions have been flagged as erroneous in the past quarter. Option D. Immediately implement a mandatory, company-wide retraining program on basic transaction processing for all staff, regardless of their specific role or performance history. The correct answer is A. Initiate a comprehensive review of the transaction processing system and associated workflows, including staff training and quality assurance procedures, to identify root causes and implement targeted corrective actions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for proactive risk mitigation with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the potential for overregulation. The performance metrics, while indicating a potential issue, are not definitive proof of a systemic problem. A hasty or overly aggressive response could lead to unnecessary costs, employee frustration, and a misallocation of valuable resources. Conversely, ignoring the metrics could expose the firm to significant regulatory scrutiny and financial penalties. Careful judgment is required to interpret the data, understand its context, and devise an appropriate and proportionate response. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted strategy that begins with deeper investigation and data validation. This aligns with the principles of sound risk management, which emphasize understanding the root cause of observed deviations before implementing broad controls. It also reflects a commitment to regulatory compliance by demonstrating a proactive and systematic approach to identifying and addressing potential risks. This method ensures that any subsequent actions are targeted, effective, and justifiable, minimizing the risk of both underregulation and overregulation. It prioritizes evidence-based decision-making, a cornerstone of professional conduct in regulated environments. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to immediately implement stringent new controls across all relevant departments without further investigation. This fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality in risk management. It could lead to unnecessary operational burdens and costs, and may not even address the actual underlying cause of the performance deviations, rendering the controls ineffective. Ethically, it could be seen as a punitive measure rather than a constructive one, potentially damaging employee morale and trust. From a regulatory perspective, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence in understanding the nature and extent of the risk. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the performance metrics as statistical anomalies without any further inquiry. This demonstrates a failure to take potential risks seriously and a disregard for the early warning signs that regulatory frameworks often encourage firms to heed. Such an approach could lead to significant regulatory breaches if the deviations are indeed indicative of systemic issues. It also fails to uphold the ethical duty of care to clients and the firm itself by neglecting potential vulnerabilities. A third incorrect approach would be to focus solely on punitive measures against individuals identified in the metrics, without understanding the systemic factors that may have contributed to the performance. This ignores the broader risk assessment framework that requires identifying and mitigating process or systemic weaknesses, not just individual failings. It can create a culture of fear rather than a culture of continuous improvement, and may not prevent future occurrences of similar performance issues. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should employ a structured decision-making process. First, they must critically evaluate the performance metrics, considering their reliability and context. Second, they should initiate a targeted investigation to understand the root causes of the observed deviations. This might involve qualitative data gathering, process reviews, and discussions with relevant personnel. Third, based on the findings of the investigation, they should assess the nature and severity of the risk. Fourth, they should develop and implement proportionate and effective risk mitigation strategies, which may include enhanced controls, training, or process improvements. Finally, they must establish a system for ongoing monitoring and review to ensure the effectiveness of the implemented measures and to adapt to changing circumstances. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, justifiable, and aligned with regulatory expectations and ethical obligations. Question 8. Regulatory review indicates that a new operational process is being implemented within ICBC. To ensure robust risk management, what is the most appropriate initial step in assessing potential risks associated with this new process? Option A. Rely solely on historical data from similar past processes to identify potential risks, assuming that current conditions will not introduce new or altered threats. Option B. Focus exclusively on identifying risks that are purely theoretical and have no immediate or foreseeable impact on the current operational phase. Option C. Develop a detailed risk register by systematically identifying potential risks, assessing their likelihood and potential impact on business objectives and compliance, and prioritizing them for mitigation. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive brainstorming session to identify every conceivable minor deviation or inefficiency that could occur during the process, regardless of its potential impact. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive brainstorming session to identify every conceivable minor deviation or inefficiency that could occur during the process, regardless of its potential impact. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the need for proactive risk identification with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the potential for over-analysis. The ICE hiring assessment test, in its focus on risk assessment, expects candidates to demonstrate an understanding of how to effectively identify and manage potential risks within a business context, without becoming paralyzed by an exhaustive and potentially unproductive level of detail. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a systematic and proportionate response to risk. By focusing on identifying risks that are material to the business objectives and operational integrity, and then assessing their likelihood and impact, professionals can effectively allocate resources to mitigation strategies. This aligns with regulatory expectations for sound risk management, which emphasizes a pragmatic and outcome-oriented approach rather than an academic exercise in listing every conceivable risk. The goal is to manage risks that could significantly hinder the organization's ability to achieve its goals or comply with its obligations. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on identifying every minor operational deviation, regardless of its potential impact, fails to demonstrate an understanding of risk prioritization. This can lead to wasted resources on managing trivial risks while more significant threats are overlooked. Ethically, it can also be seen as a failure to act with due diligence and prudence, as the focus is misplaced. Another incorrect approach that relies on historical data alone without considering current market dynamics or emerging threats is also professionally deficient. While historical data is valuable, it does not account for evolving risk landscapes. Regulatory frameworks often require forward-looking risk assessments that consider future uncertainties and potential disruptions. Failing to do so can lead to a false sense of security and inadequate preparedness. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This typically includes defining the scope of the assessment, identifying potential risks, considering both internal and external factors, analyzing the likelihood and impact of identified risks, evaluating the existing controls, and developing appropriate mitigation strategies. Crucially, this process should be iterative and adaptable, allowing for adjustments as new information becomes available or the business environment changes. The emphasis should always be on managing risks that pose a genuine threat to the organization's objectives and compliance. Question 9. Strategic planning requires a robust framework for identifying, analyzing, and responding to potential threats. Considering the dynamic nature of the insurance market and the regulatory environment in British Columbia, which of the following approaches to risk assessment best supports long-term financial stability and operational integrity? Option A. A comprehensive risk assessment that integrates internal and external factors, considers both historical trends and future uncertainties, and is regularly reviewed and updated to reflect evolving market conditions and emerging threats. Option B. A risk assessment conducted independently of the corporation's strategic objectives, focusing solely on operational risks without considering broader market or regulatory influences. Option C. A risk assessment that relies primarily on historical loss data to predict future events, assuming that past patterns will accurately forecast future outcomes. Option D. A risk assessment that focuses exclusively on risks with the highest frequency of occurrence, allocating resources only to mitigate these common issues. The correct answer is A. A comprehensive risk assessment that integrates internal and external factors, considers both historical trends and future uncertainties, and is regularly reviewed and updated to reflect evolving market conditions and emerging threats. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need for robust risk assessment with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the dynamic nature of the financial markets. The Insurance Corporation of British Columbia operates within a regulated environment, necessitating adherence to specific guidelines for risk management. The challenge lies in identifying and prioritizing risks that could significantly impact the corporation's financial stability and operational integrity, while also considering the potential for emerging threats that may not be immediately apparent. Effective judgment is crucial to ensure that risk assessment processes are both comprehensive and proportionate to the organization's risk appetite and capacity. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a forward-looking, comprehensive, and integrated risk assessment methodology. This aligns with best professional practices and regulatory expectations for financial institutions. By considering both internal and external factors, including market volatility, regulatory changes, and operational vulnerabilities, the corporation can proactively identify potential threats. The emphasis on regular review and adaptation ensures that the risk assessment remains relevant and effective in a constantly evolving landscape. This proactive stance is crucial for maintaining financial health and fulfilling its mandate to the public. As expected under ICBC operational framework and relevant insurance regulations in British Columbia. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on historical data without adequately considering future uncertainties or emerging risks. This fails to meet the dynamic requirements of risk management, as past performance is not always indicative of future outcomes, especially in volatile markets. This approach could lead to a false sense of security and leave the corporation exposed to unforeseen events, potentially violating prudent risk management principles expected by regulators. Another incorrect approach prioritizes only the most frequently occurring risks, neglecting those with a lower probability but potentially catastrophic impact. This narrow focus can lead to a misallocation of resources and an incomplete understanding of the overall risk profile. Effective risk management requires considering the severity of potential losses, not just their frequency, to ensure adequate mitigation strategies are in place for all significant threats, as mandated by sound financial governance. A third incorrect approach involves conducting risk assessments in isolation from strategic objectives. Risk management should be intrinsically linked to the organization's goals and operational strategies. Without this integration, risk assessments may not identify threats that directly impede the achievement of strategic aims, or they may propose mitigation measures that are counterproductive to business objectives. This disconnect undermines the purpose of risk assessment as a tool for informed strategic decision-making. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and iterative approach to risk assessment. This involves 1. Defining the scope and objectives of the assessment, aligned with organizational strategy. 2. Identifying potential risks across all relevant categories: strategic, operational, financial, compliance. 3. Analyzing the likelihood and impact of identified risks. 4. Evaluating existing controls and determining the residual risk. 5. Developing and implementing risk mitigation strategies. 6. Continuously monitoring and reviewing the risk landscape and the effectiveness of mitigation efforts. This structured process, informed by both historical data and forward-looking analysis, ensures a robust and adaptable risk management framework. Question 10. Process analysis reveals that a client who is nearing retirement and has limited savings expresses a strong desire to invest their entire portfolio in highly speculative growth stocks, citing a desire for maximum returns to compensate for their perceived late start in investing. What is the most appropriate professional response? Option A. Immediately invest the client's portfolio in speculative growth stocks as requested, to honor their stated desire for maximum returns and avoid alienating them. Option B. Conduct a detailed fact-finding exercise to understand the client's complete financial situation, time horizon, liquidity needs, and their understanding of the risks associated with speculative investments. Then present a range of suitable strategies that align with their goals and risk capacity. Option C. Focus solely on the client's stated goal of maximum returns and select the highest risk investment products available, assuming the client understands the potential for significant losses. Option D. Advise the client that their investment strategy is too risky given their proximity to retirement and unilaterally recommend a conservative, low-risk portfolio without further discussion. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed fact-finding exercise to understand the client's complete financial situation, time horizon, liquidity needs, and their understanding of the risks associated with speculative investments. Then present a range of suitable strategies that align with their goals and risk capacity. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in financial advisory, where a client's stated risk tolerance appears to contradict their financial situation and stated goals. The professional must navigate the delicate balance between respecting client autonomy and fulfilling their fiduciary duty to provide suitable advice. The challenge lies in identifying when a client's expressed preferences might lead to an unsuitable outcome, requiring a deeper investigation and potentially a gentle redirection. The ICE hiring assessment test would likely evaluate a candidate's ability to identify such discrepancies and respond ethically and professionally, adhering to regulatory expectations for client suitability. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted strategy that prioritizes understanding the client's complete financial picture and the underlying reasons for their stated preferences. This aligns with best professional practice and regulatory requirements, such as those mandated by the ICE framework, which emphasizes client-centric advice and suitability. By conducting a thorough fact-finding process, including detailed discussions about financial goals, time horizons, and liquidity needs, the advisor can build a comprehensive profile. This allows for an informed assessment of whether the client's stated risk tolerance is genuinely aligned with their capacity and willingness to bear risk in pursuit of their objectives. If a mismatch is identified, the professional's duty is to educate the client on the implications of different risk levels and present alternative strategies that are more appropriate, rather than simply accepting the client's initial, potentially unsuitable, request. This demonstrates a commitment to the client's best interests and upholds the integrity of the advisory relationship. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately proceeding with the client's stated preference for a high-risk investment strategy without further inquiry. This fails to meet the regulatory obligation to ensure suitability. It disregards the potential for the client to misunderstand the implications of high risk or to have unrealistic expectations, leading to potential financial harm. Ethically, it prioritizes client compliance over client well-being. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's stated risk tolerance outright and unilaterally impose a low-risk strategy. This disrespects client autonomy and can damage the professional relationship. While the intention might be to protect the client, it bypasses the crucial step of understanding the client's perspective and educating them on the trade-offs. It also fails to explore if there are ways to structure a high-risk strategy that might still be suitable with appropriate safeguards and client understanding. A third incorrect approach is to focus solely on the client's stated desire for aggressive growth without adequately probing their understanding of potential losses or their emotional response to market volatility. This superficial assessment can lead to a recommendation that, while aligned with the client's stated goal, is not truly suitable given their underlying capacity and willingness to absorb potential downturns. It neglects the behavioral aspects of risk management, which are critical for long-term investment success and client satisfaction. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with comprehensive data gathering. This includes not only stated preferences, but also objective financial circumstances, time horizons, and liquidity requirements. The next step is to analyze this data for potential inconsistencies or areas of concern, such as a mismatch between risk tolerance and financial goals. If a discrepancy is found, the professional must engage in a dialogue with the client to explore the reasons behind their preferences and to educate them about the implications of different investment strategies. This educational component is crucial for informed consent and for managing client expectations. The final step is to recommend a course of action that is demonstrably suitable, documented, and aligned with the client's best interests, while respecting their ultimate decision-making authority after being fully informed. Question 11. Implementation of a new client data access protocol requires an employee to respond to an external request for information that appears to be for a business partner. The request is specific, but does not clearly state the ultimate purpose of the data. The employee is unsure if the request aligns with ICE data sharing agreements and privacy policies. Option A. Escalate the request to a supervisor or the designated privacy officer to verify its legitimacy and ensure compliance with ICE data sharing agreements and privacy policies before providing any information. Option B. Refuse to provide any information, citing general privacy concerns, without seeking further clarification or verification. Option C. Interpret the request based on the employee's understanding of typical business partner needs and provide the information that seems most relevant. Option D. Directly provide the requested information to the external party, assuming the request is valid given it comes from a business partner. The correct answer is A. Escalate the request to a supervisor or the designated privacy officer to verify its legitimacy and ensure compliance with ICE data sharing agreements and privacy policies before providing any information. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge where an employee, acting on behalf of ICE, is asked to provide information that could potentially be used for purposes beyond the immediate authorized request. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need to be helpful and efficient with the paramount duty to protect client confidentiality and adhere to ICE's strict data privacy policies. Misinterpreting the request or acting without proper authorization could lead to significant breaches of trust and regulatory violations. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing data protection and adherence to ICE-established protocols. It involves seeking clarification and verifying the legitimacy of the request through appropriate channels. This aligns with the regulatory framework governing ICE, which emphasizes the responsible handling of personal information and the prevention of unauthorized disclosure. By escalating the request to a supervisor or the designated privacy officer, the employee ensures that the information is only shared if it meets all legal and policy requirements, thereby upholding client confidentiality and ICE integrity. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly providing the requested information without further inquiry. This fails to uphold the duty of care regarding client data and could violate ICE internal policies and potentially relevant privacy legislation by disclosing information without proper authorization or a clear, legitimate business purpose. Another incorrect approach is to refuse to provide any information whatsoever, even if the request is legitimate and from an authorized source. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of ICE operational needs and could hinder legitimate business processes, potentially leading to inefficiencies and a failure to serve clients effectively, even if it errs on the side of caution. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to interpret the request and provide information based on assumptions. This is professionally unsound as it introduces a high risk of misinterpretation, leading to the disclosure of inappropriate or sensitive data, or conversely, withholding necessary information. It bypasses the established checks and balances designed to ensure data accuracy and compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, they must carefully analyze the request, considering its source, stated purpose, and the type of information sought. Second, they should consult relevant internal policies and procedures, particularly those related to data privacy and information sharing. Third, if any ambiguity exists or if the request falls outside routine operations, they must seek clarification from their supervisor or the appropriate department, e.g., Privacy Office. This systematic approach ensures that actions are compliant, ethical, and in the best interest of both the client and the organization. Question 12. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood and high impact for the implementation of a new customer onboarding compliance system. Considering this, what is the most prudent next step for the project lead? Option A. Delegate the decision-making to the compliance department without further personal involvement. Option B. Immediately halt the project to avoid any potential negative impact, as the risk score is too high. Option C. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the identified risks and develop specific, actionable mitigation strategies before proceeding with implementation. Option D. Proceed with the implementation as planned, assuming the benefits of the new system outweigh the potential risks. The correct answer is C. Conduct a detailed root cause analysis of the identified risks and develop specific, actionable mitigation strategies before proceeding with implementation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to interpret a risk matrix and apply it to a real-world business decision, specifically concerning the implementation of a new compliance system. The challenge lies in moving beyond a purely quantitative assessment of risk, as presented in the matrix, to a qualitative and strategic evaluation of the implications for the organization's operational efficiency and regulatory adherence. Careful judgment is required to balance the identified risks with the potential benefits and the practicalities of implementation. The correct approach represents best professional practice because It involves a holistic assessment that considers the risk matrix as one input among several. It prioritizes understanding the root causes of the identified risks, evaluating the feasibility and effectiveness of proposed mitigation strategies, and aligning the decision with the organization's overall strategic objectives and risk appetite. This approach demonstrates due diligence, proactive risk management, and a commitment to informed decision-making, which are fundamental to maintaining regulatory compliance and operational integrity. It also reflects an understanding that risk matrices are tools to inform, not dictate, decisions. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the highest-rated risks without considering mitigation feasibility would be a regulatory failure. It ignores the principle of proportionality in risk management, potentially leading to the abandonment of beneficial initiatives due to an overemphasis on theoretical risk without practical solutions. Another incorrect approach, which prioritizes speed of implementation over thorough risk assessment, would be an ethical and regulatory failure. This could lead to the deployment of a system that is not adequately tested or configured, increasing the likelihood of compliance breaches and operational disruptions. A third incorrect approach, which dismisses the risk matrix entirely as an abstract tool, would be a failure in professional judgment and a disregard for established risk management frameworks, potentially leading to underestimation of significant threats. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the context and objectives. This involves clearly defining the problem or decision to be made. Next, relevant information, including risk assessments like the matrix, should be gathered and analyzed. This analysis should then be followed by the identification and evaluation of potential courses of action, considering their risks, benefits, and feasibility. The decision should then be made based on this comprehensive evaluation, with a clear rationale. Finally, the decision should be monitored and reviewed for effectiveness and any necessary adjustments. Question 13. Benchmark analysis indicates that a financial advisor, while reviewing a client's recent trading activity, notices a pattern that strongly suggests potential insider trading. The advisor has a strong professional relationship with the client and is concerned about the impact of any accusation on the client's reputation and their own business. The advisor is unsure of the exact steps to take to address this situation while adhering to ICBC regulatory framework. Which of the following represents the most appropriate and professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Directly confront the client with the suspicions of insider trading to understand their perspective before taking any further action. Option B. Ignore the suspicious trading activity to avoid potential conflict and maintain a positive client relationship. Option C. Immediately consult with the ICBC compliance department to discuss the observed activity and seek guidance on the appropriate reporting procedures. Option D. Report the suspicion directly to external regulatory authorities without first informing ICBC internal compliance department. Correct answer is C. Immediately consult with the ICBC compliance department to discuss the observed activity and seek guidance on the appropriate reporting procedures. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between client confidentiality and the need to report potential regulatory breaches. The financial advisor must navigate the delicate balance of upholding their fiduciary duty to the client, while also adhering to their obligations under ICBC regulatory framework, which mandates reporting of suspicious activities. Failure to act appropriately could result in severe consequences for both the client and the advisor, including regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and potential legal liabilities. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. By seeking guidance from the ICBC compliance department, the advisor is proactively fulfilling their reporting obligations without prematurely disclosing sensitive client information to unauthorized parties. This aligns with ICBC guidelines on handling suspected breaches, which emphasize internal reporting channels for investigation and appropriate action. This approach upholds the advisor's duty to act in the best interests of the client by ensuring any potential issues are addressed through the proper channels, minimizing unnecessary client distress or exposure. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly confronting the client with suspicions of insider trading without first consulting the compliance department. This violates ICBC internal procedures for handling such matters and could compromise any subsequent investigation. It also risks alienating the client and potentially tipping them off, hindering the ability to gather necessary evidence. Furthermore, it bypasses the established reporting mechanism, which is a clear breach of regulatory protocol. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the suspicious activity due to a desire to avoid conflict or potential negative repercussions for the client relationship. This constitutes a failure to uphold the advisor's fiduciary duty and their obligation to report potential regulatory violations. Ignoring such activity can have serious consequences for the integrity of the financial markets and expose the advisor to disciplinary action for negligence or complicity. A third incorrect approach is to immediately report the suspicion to external regulatory bodies without internal consultation. While reporting to regulators is a crucial step, bypassing internal compliance channels first is often contrary to established procedures. Internal departments are equipped to assess the situation, gather preliminary information, and determine the most appropriate course of action, which may include escalating to external bodies or handling the matter internally. This premature external reporting can create unnecessary alarm and complicate the investigation process. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such dilemmas should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, identify the core conflict, client confidentiality versus regulatory obligation. Second, consult the relevant internal policies and procedures of the organization, in this case, guidelines for reporting suspicious activities. Third, seek guidance from the designated compliance or legal department. Fourth, act in accordance with the advice received, ensuring all actions are documented. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, compliant, and ethically sound, protecting both the individual professional and the organization. Question 14. Quality control measures reveal a pattern of minor data entry errors in customer policy details across several departments. While the errors are individually small, their cumulative effect could impact reporting accuracy. What is the most appropriate next step for the data integrity team? Option A. Implement a mandatory, increased frequency of manual cross-checking for all data entries by a separate team to catch more errors. Option B. Focus on retraining the specific employees identified as making the majority of the errors, assuming individual performance is the primary issue. Option C. Conduct a comprehensive review of data entry procedures, training materials, and system functionalities to identify systemic causes for the discrepancies and implement targeted improvements. Option D. Classify the observed discrepancies as within an acceptable tolerance level for data entry and monitor for significant deviations without further immediate action. Correct answer is C. Conduct a comprehensive review of data entry procedures, training materials, and system functionalities to identify systemic causes for the discrepancies and implement targeted improvements. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for efficient data processing with the imperative to maintain data integrity and comply with internal policies and relevant privacy regulations. The pressure to meet deadlines can lead to shortcuts that compromise accuracy, potentially impacting customer service, risk assessment, and regulatory reporting. The professional challenge lies in identifying and rectifying systemic issues rather than just individual errors, ensuring that the quality control process itself is robust and effective. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation into the root cause of the data discrepancy. This demonstrates best professional practice by prioritizing accuracy and compliance. It aligns with commitment to data integrity, which is crucial for operational efficiency, accurate risk management, and maintaining customer trust. Furthermore, it reflects a proactive stance in identifying and addressing systemic weaknesses in data handling processes, which is often a requirement under data protection guidelines that mandate accuracy and accountability for personal information. This approach ensures that corrective actions are targeted and sustainable, preventing future recurrences. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach focuses solely on retraining the individual employee responsible for the data entry. This fails to acknowledge that the issue might be systemic, stemming from inadequate training materials, unclear procedures, or flawed system design. It is a reactive measure that doesn't address the underlying cause and could lead to repeated errors if the systemic issues remain unaddressed, potentially violating internal quality standards and any applicable data handling regulations that require robust process controls. Another incorrect approach is to simply increase the frequency of manual data checks without investigating the source of the errors. While this might catch more errors in the short term, it is an inefficient and unsustainable solution. It does not improve the accuracy of the initial data entry and can lead to increased operational costs and employee burnout. This approach neglects the principle of continuous improvement and fails to address the root cause, which is a fundamental aspect of effective quality management and regulatory compliance. A third incorrect approach is to dismiss the discrepancies as minor and within an acceptable margin of error without proper validation. This is a dangerous practice that undermines the importance of data accuracy. Even seemingly minor errors can have significant cumulative effects, impacting financial reporting, customer profiles, and regulatory compliance. This approach directly contravenes the principle of data integrity and could lead to breaches of ICBC internal policies and potentially regulatory requirements for accurate record keeping. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the scope and impact of the discrepancies. This involves gathering evidence, identifying patterns, and then investigating the underlying processes and controls. The decision-making process should prioritize root cause analysis, followed by the implementation of targeted corrective and preventative actions. This systematic approach ensures that issues are resolved effectively, compliance is maintained, and continuous improvement is fostered within the organization. Question 15. Investigation of how a financial advisor should respond when a client, who has expressed a desire for a specific, higher-risk investment product, is presented with information that suggests a more conservative option might better align with their stated long-term financial goals and risk tolerance. Option A. Conduct a thorough assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, then present all suitable investment options, including the client's preference and the recommended conservative option, with a clear explanation of the risks and benefits of each, allowing the client to make an informed decision. Option B. Agree to the client's preferred investment, but only after obtaining a signed waiver acknowledging the increased risks, without providing a detailed comparison to other available options. Option C. Immediately recommend the more conservative investment option, overriding the client's stated preference without a detailed explanation of why it is superior for their goals. Option D. Proceed with the client's preferred investment, emphasizing its potential for higher returns and downplaying any associated risks to maintain client satisfaction. Correct answer is D. Proceed with the client's preferred investment, emphasizing its potential for higher returns and downplaying any associated risks to maintain client satisfaction. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's stated preference and the advisor's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, especially when the client's preference may lead to suboptimal outcomes or increased risk. The advisor must navigate this by ensuring the client is fully informed and that their decision is truly their own, rather than being influenced by incomplete or misleading information. The ICBC hiring assessment test would expect candidates to demonstrate an understanding of client-centric advice and the importance of transparency. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a thorough, unbiased assessment of the client's financial situation, risk tolerance, and objectives, followed by a clear explanation of all suitable options, including their respective risks and benefits. This aligns with the principles of best interest duty, which mandates that financial advice provided must be in the client's best interest. It requires the advisor to act with integrity, diligence, and transparency, ensuring the client can make an informed decision. This approach prioritizes the client's well-being over immediate client satisfaction, if that satisfaction is based on a potentially detrimental choice. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately proceeding with the client's preferred investment without further investigation. This fails the best interest duty by potentially exposing the client to undue risk or suboptimal returns, thereby not acting in their best interest. It also bypasses the crucial step of due diligence and informed consent. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's preference outright and insist on a different course of action without adequately explaining the rationale. This can be perceived as paternalistic and may damage the client relationship. Ethically, it fails to respect the client's autonomy and right to make their own decisions, even if those decisions are not what the advisor would personally recommend, provided the client is fully informed of the consequences. A further incorrect approach is to present only the preferred investment option, highlighting its perceived benefits while downplaying or omitting its risks. This is a clear breach of transparency and the duty to provide comprehensive advice. It misleads the client and prevents them from making a truly informed decision, violating ethical standards and regulatory expectations for fair dealing. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a framework that begins with understanding the client's needs and objectives. This is followed by a comprehensive analysis of available options, considering all relevant factors including risks, rewards, and costs. Crucially, all suitable options must be presented to the client in a clear, understandable manner, with a balanced discussion of pros and cons. The advisor's role is to guide and educate, empowering the client to make an informed decision that aligns with their best interests, rather than dictating a course of action or simply acquiescing to a potentially harmful preference. Question 16. What factors determine the effectiveness of a newly implemented internal control procedure designed to mitigate operational risks within ICE, beyond mere procedural documentation? Option A. The positive verbal assurances from the department head responsible for implementing the control, indicating general satisfaction with its operation. Option B. The completeness of the written policy and procedure manual detailing the new control, and confirmation that all relevant departments have received a copy. Option C. The extent to which the control has demonstrably reduced the frequency and impact of targeted operational incidents, supported by relevant key risk indicators and qualitative feedback from operational staff. Option D. The number of training sessions conducted for staff on the new control procedure, regardless of whether the training content was fully absorbed or applied. The correct answer is C. The extent to which the control has demonstrably reduced the frequency and impact of targeted operational incidents, supported by relevant key risk indicators and qualitative feedback from operational staff. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in assessing the effectiveness of a new internal control procedure designed to mitigate operational risks within ICE. The challenge lies in moving beyond a superficial review to a deep evaluation of whether the control is truly achieving its intended purpose, identifying potential weaknesses, and ensuring compliance with ICE operational risk management framework. This requires a nuanced understanding of risk, control design, and the practicalities of implementation, demanding careful judgment to avoid over-reliance on anecdotal evidence or incomplete data. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multifaceted evaluation that combines quantitative data analysis with qualitative assessments. This includes reviewing key risk indicators, CRI, directly linked to the control's objective, examining incident reports to see if the control has prevented or mitigated relevant issues, and conducting targeted interviews with staff directly involved in the process. This approach is best professional practice because it provides a comprehensive and evidence-based assessment of the control's effectiveness. It aligns with ICE's commitment to robust operational risk management by ensuring that controls are not just in place, but are actively and demonstrably reducing identified risks. This aligns with the principles of good governance and due diligence expected of financial institutions. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to solely rely on management's self-assessment or anecdotal feedback without independent verification. This fails to meet professional standards because it bypasses the need for objective evidence and can be influenced by bias or a desire to present a favorable view. It represents a failure to exercise due diligence and can lead to a false sense of security, leaving ICE exposed to unmitigated risks. Another incorrect approach is to focus only on the documentation and existence of the control procedure, without assessing its actual implementation and impact. This is a procedural compliance check rather than an effectiveness evaluation. It is ethically problematic as it suggests a superficial understanding of risk management, potentially overlooking significant control gaps. This approach would violate the spirit of ICE risk management framework, which emphasizes demonstrable risk reduction. A third incorrect approach is to conduct a broad, unfocused review of all operational processes without prioritizing areas where the new control is intended to have the most impact. This lacks efficiency and may not yield actionable insights into the specific control's performance. It demonstrates a lack of strategic thinking in risk assessment and could lead to wasted resources, failing to provide the targeted assurance required by ICE risk management mandate. Professional reasoning. professionals should adopt a structured approach to evaluating control effectiveness. This involves 1. Clearly defining the control's objective and the specific risks it aims to mitigate. 2. Identifying relevant metrics and data points that can objectively measure the control's performance. 3. Gathering both quantitative and qualitative evidence to support the assessment. 4. Corroborating findings through multiple sources. 5. Documenting the assessment process and conclusions clearly. 6. Recommending improvements based on the evidence. This systematic process ensures that evaluations are thorough, objective, and contribute to the continuous improvement of risk management capabilities. Question 17. When evaluating the implementation of a new disclosure policy for material information, what is the most professionally responsible approach to ensure compliance with regulatory requirements and maintain market integrity? Option A. Disclose information in a highly technical and fragmented manner to ensure absolute precision, assuming sophisticated investors will interpret it correctly. Option B. Release preliminary or unverified information to meet the immediate market expectation or internal deadline. Option C. Prioritize the accuracy and completeness of the disclosure, even if it requires a slight delay beyond the initial target release date, after thorough internal verification. Option D. Withhold material information if there is internal disagreement on its interpretation or implications, pending further internal review. The correct answer is C. Prioritize the accuracy and completeness of the disclosure, even if it requires a slight delay beyond the initial target release date, after thorough internal verification. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for timely information dissemination with the regulatory obligation to ensure accuracy and prevent market manipulation. The pressure to release information quickly to meet market expectations or competitive pressures can lead to premature or incomplete disclosures, which can mislead investors and create an unfair advantage for those with early access. The hiring assessment test would likely assess an understanding of how to navigate these competing demands responsibly. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes accuracy and completeness in disclosure, even if it means a slight delay. This aligns with the core principles of fair disclosure and investor protection mandated by regulatory frameworks governing financial markets. By verifying information and ensuring it is presented in a clear, comprehensive manner, the organization upholds its duty to provide material information to all investors simultaneously, thereby preventing insider trading and maintaining market integrity. This approach reflects a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, which are paramount in the financial industry. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves releasing preliminary or unverified information to meet a deadline. This is a direct violation of disclosure regulations that require material information to be accurate and not misleading. Such an action could lead to investor losses and significant regulatory penalties, including fines and reputational damage. It also creates an environment where selective disclosure is possible, undermining market fairness. Another incorrect approach is to withhold material information due to internal disagreements or uncertainty about its interpretation. While internal debate is healthy, withholding information that a reasonable investor would consider important is a failure to disclose. Regulations typically require disclosure of all material information, and internal processes should not impede this obligation. This can lead to accusations of market manipulation or insider trading if certain parties gain an advantage from the withheld information. A third incorrect approach is to release information in a fragmented or overly technical manner that is difficult for the average investor to understand. While technical accuracy is important, the spirit of disclosure regulations is to ensure that information is accessible and comprehensible to the investing public. Obfuscating information, even unintentionally, can be seen as a failure to provide fair disclosure and can lead to misinterpretations and market inefficiencies. Professional reasoning. Professionals must adopt a proactive and diligent approach to information disclosure. This involves establishing robust internal processes for information verification, ensuring clear communication channels, and understanding the materiality of information. When faced with time pressures or internal conflicts, professionals should refer to established disclosure policies and seek guidance from legal or compliance departments. The decision-making process should always prioritize regulatory compliance, ethical conduct, and the protection of investors over short-term expediency. Question 18. Risk assessment procedures indicate that the implementation of a new, comprehensive risk management framework at ICE requires careful consideration of operational integration and staff readiness. Given the complexity of the new framework and the need to ensure its effectiveness and compliance, which approach to implementation would best mitigate potential risks and ensure successful adoption? Option A. Prioritize the immediate documentation of the new framework's policies and procedures, deferring practical implementation and training to a later stage. Option B. Deploy the new framework across all ICE departments simultaneously to achieve immediate compliance and standardization. Option C. Initiate a pilot program in a selected department to test the framework's efficacy and gather feedback before a full-scale rollout. Option D. Adopt a competitor's risk management framework verbatim, assuming it will meet ICE-specific needs and regulatory obligations. The correct answer is C. Initiate a pilot program in a selected department to test the framework's efficacy and gather feedback before a full-scale rollout. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario presents a challenge in implementing a new risk assessment framework within ICE. The core difficulty lies in balancing the need for a robust, compliant framework with the practical realities of integrating it into existing operational workflows and ensuring staff buy-in. The chosen approach must not only meet regulatory requirements, but also be sustainable and effective in practice, avoiding disruption while enhancing risk management capabilities. The pressure to demonstrate immediate compliance without thorough preparation can lead to superficial adoption, undermining the long-term effectiveness of the framework. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach emphasizes a phased implementation, starting with a pilot program. This represents best professional practice because it allows for the testing and refinement of the new framework in a controlled environment before a full rollout. This aligns with regulatory expectations for due diligence and effective risk management, as it demonstrates a commitment to ensuring the framework's practicality and efficacy. A pilot program facilitates early identification of potential issues, allows for staff training and feedback, and minimizes the risk of widespread disruption. This iterative process ensures that the final implemented framework is robust, practical, and compliant with ICE-specific operational context and relevant regulatory guidelines. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing the framework immediately across all departments without prior testing is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. It risks introducing unforeseen operational disruption, potentially leading to non-compliance with risk management obligations due to untested procedures. This approach prioritizes speed over effectiveness and demonstrates a lack of due diligence in ensuring the framework's suitability. Focusing solely on documenting the framework without considering its practical application or staff training is another failure. Regulations require not just the existence of a framework, but its active and effective implementation. This approach would lead to a paper compliance scenario, where the documented procedures are not understood or followed by staff, rendering the risk assessment ineffective and potentially exposing ICE to regulatory scrutiny. Adopting a framework that is a direct copy of a competitor's without customization ignores ICE's unique operational context and risk profile. This can lead to a framework that is either overly burdensome or insufficient for ICE-specific needs, failing to meet regulatory requirements for a tailored and effective risk management system. It also suggests a lack of independent analysis and due diligence in developing a suitable risk assessment process. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such implementation challenges should adopt a structured, risk-based approach. This involves 1. Understanding the regulatory requirements thoroughly. 2. Conducting a gap analysis between current practices and the new framework. 3. Developing a detailed implementation plan that includes phased rollout, pilot testing, and comprehensive training. 4. Establishing clear communication channels for feedback and continuous improvement. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating the framework based on performance and evolving regulatory landscapes. This systematic process ensures that new initiatives are implemented effectively, compliantly, and with minimal disruption, fostering a culture of robust risk management. Question 19. Market research demonstrates that a significant portion of trading activity is influenced by early insights into emerging industry trends. Your team has received an anonymous tip suggesting a competitor, is on the verge of a major technological breakthrough that could significantly impact the valuation of several publicly traded companies within your sector. The tip provides some technical details but no concrete evidence of the breakthrough's confirmation or public announcement. What is the most appropriate course of action for your team? Option A. Disseminate the technical details of the tip to your sales team to inform client discussions about potential market shifts. Option B. Conduct further due diligence to ascertain the credibility of the anonymous tip and the nature of the information, consulting with compliance if any aspect appears to be material non-public information. Option C. Initiate trading strategies based on the potential impact of the rumored breakthrough, assuming the tip is accurate and will soon become public knowledge. Option D. Immediately cease all trading activities related to companies in the affected sector until the information can be independently verified through public channels. Correct answer is D. Immediately cease all trading activities related to companies in the affected sector until the information can be independently verified through public channels. Explanation. This scenario presents a challenge in balancing the need for timely and accurate market intelligence with the regulatory obligation to prevent market abuse, specifically insider trading. The core difficulty lies in discerning when information crosses the line from general market observation to specific, non-public, price-sensitive information that, if acted upon, could constitute a breach of securities regulations. Professionals must exercise a high degree of judgment to avoid both the reputational damage of appearing to condone or facilitate insider trading and the operational risk of missing genuine market opportunities due to excessive caution. The correct approach involves a rigorous process of information verification and assessment against regulatory definitions of inside information. This means actively seeking to understand the source and nature of any potentially market-moving information, determining if it is publicly available, and assessing its potential impact on the price of a security. This aligns with the principles of fair markets and investor protection mandated by securities laws, which prohibit trading on material non-public information. By adhering to established internal policies and seeking guidance when in doubt, professionals uphold their ethical and legal responsibilities. An incorrect approach would be to disseminate or act upon information that is clearly non-public and potentially price-sensitive without proper verification. This could involve sharing preliminary research findings that are not yet substantiated or are based on rumors, or making investment decisions based on tips from sources whose reliability and access to non-public information are questionable. Such actions directly contravene regulations designed to ensure market integrity and prevent unfair advantages. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore potentially significant market developments due to an overly cautious interpretation of regulations, leading to missed legitimate investment opportunities and a failure to serve client interests effectively. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the nuances of market information and regulatory boundaries. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Information gathering and initial assessment. Understand the source and nature of the information. 2. Public availability check. Determine if the information is already in the public domain. 3. Price sensitivity evaluation. Assess whether the information, if public, would likely influence the price of a security. 4. Source verification and due diligence. For non-public information, investigate the source's credibility and access to such information. 5. Internal consultation. If there is any doubt about the nature or implications of the information, consult with compliance or legal departments. 6. Documentation. Maintain records of the information received, the assessment process, and the decision made. Question 20. Cost-benefit analysis shows that outsourcing a portion of ICE claims processing to a third-party vendor could significantly reduce operational expenses. However, this vendor operates in a jurisdiction with less stringent data privacy laws than British Columbia. Considering ICE obligations under the Insurance Act and the Personal Information Protection Act, PIPA, of British Columbia, what is the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Conduct a thorough due diligence assessment of the vendor's data security practices and compliance with BC's PIPA, and explore contractual clauses that mandate adherence to BC privacy standards, even if it increases the vendor's costs. Option B. Proceed with the outsourcing, ensuring the vendor signs a robust non-disclosure agreement, as the cost savings are substantial and the risk of a data breach is deemed low. Option C. Negotiate a contract that allows the vendor to process claims using their existing infrastructure, with ICE retaining full responsibility for any data breaches that occur. Option D. Reject the outsourcing proposal outright due to the differing data privacy laws, prioritizing absolute certainty of compliance over potential cost savings. The correct answer is B. Proceed with the outsourcing, ensuring the vendor signs a robust non-disclosure agreement, as the cost savings are substantial and the risk of a data breach is deemed low. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate financial benefits of a proposed operational change against potential long-term risks and regulatory compliance. The core of the challenge lies in the ICE mandate to serve the public interest while operating efficiently. A hasty decision based solely on cost savings, without a thorough understanding of the implications for customer service, data security, and regulatory adherence, could lead to significant reputational damage and potential penalties. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that integrates regulatory requirements, customer impact, and operational feasibility. This aligns with ICE's duty to provide reliable insurance services and protect customer data, as mandated by relevant provincial legislation governing insurance and privacy. Best professional practice dictates a phased implementation with pilot testing and continuous monitoring to ensure the proposed change meets both efficiency goals and regulatory obligations. This proactive approach minimizes disruption and allows for adjustments before full rollout. Incorrect approaches fail to adequately consider the multifaceted responsibilities of ICE. Focusing solely on cost reduction without evaluating the impact on service delivery or data privacy would violate the principle of acting in the public interest and could contravene privacy legislation by exposing sensitive customer information. Implementing a change without adequate stakeholder consultation, including IT security and customer service departments, risks creating unforeseen operational bottlenecks or security vulnerabilities, which could lead to breaches of data protection regulations. Furthermore, bypassing established change management protocols, even if seemingly faster, undermines the integrity of operational processes and increases the likelihood of errors and compliance failures. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with clearly defining the problem and objectives. This should be followed by identifying all relevant stakeholders and their concerns. A thorough analysis of potential solutions, including their costs, benefits, risks, and regulatory implications, is crucial. The chosen solution should then be subjected to rigorous testing and validation before implementation, with clear metrics for success and ongoing monitoring. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are informed, defensible, and aligned with both organizational goals and regulatory requirements.